So for everyone, yeah, we're moving into the behind the scenes of the industry hiring process, one of our most popular sessions that we usually run. And with this, our presenter is now back to Angela. For everyone who has joined just now, Angela will do a short intro.
Okay. Elena, can you see me? I added myself to the spotlight and I'm not sure.
Actually, I can
I,
see you. No, you're in the spotlight. You are in the
okay,
spotlight.
perfect. Um, all right. So I want to, oops. Um, okay. So I want to start off for those of you who have just joined. My name is Angela Priest. I'm the COO here at Alma Me. I have over 20 years of experience building hiring processes, managing hiring teams, mentoring hiring managers. So I have a lot of experience about what happens in the decision making room. And I loved all of the things that the previous panel was saying about this because really your career journey is yours and you have to be in the driver's seat. If you don't take the wheel, nobody else is going to do it for you and you're going to kind of float along and go down the road and several years later find out that you're not really happy in what you're doing. And so when you find that thing that you're passionate about and the place where you fit and you're supposed to be, things like work-life balance and things like that, it just becomes, like Ben said, it just becomes life. And it doesn't feel like you're balancing all of the things. It just feels like much more integrated and you'll be much more
Boa
kind of
sorte.
aligned and
Eu estava
attuned
desconfiado que tu ias
to
ser o
what.
ok.
So the other thing that I was noticing
Sim,
as we were going through the chat, there is a lot of frustration and
fizeste uma nova?
fear
Como
and
fizeste?
oh, can we have everybody mute yourself? If
É
you're
um
not on mute,
sim,
please go ahead and mute
é.
yourself.
São uns cristalzinhos que parece açúcar.
Okay. So as I was saying, if you're in this space where you're feeling frustrated, where you're feeling disenfranchised, where you're feeling like you just can't cut through all the noise, one of the biggest things that we see in our program when we're working with PhDs and kind of helping them through their job search, it really boils down in a lot of cases to positioning. And so it's so critically important to understand how to speak the language of industry as you're going into this transition. And so I'm going to kind of pull back the curtain so you can kind of understand what is going through all of our minds, why certain things happen in certain ways, so that in some cases you can get past the frustration and understand the reason why so that you can leverage that in the way that you approach your search. So, I think one of the things, and it was broached on in the last panel, that staying in academia is often treated as the default path. But the reality is, and Irina mentioned this, that there just aren't enough jobs for everybody to stay in academia. And so what we see is that depending on where you're at in the world, over 70% of academics are going to leave academia at some point. And so while there's a lot of guilt and there's a lot of emotions around that transition, know that it's a completely normal path. And it's for some people, academia is the right path. And for others, industry is the right path. And both of those are perfectly valid and they're perfectly normal. And so if you're feeling guilty, if you're feeling all the emotions, know that that's a normal thing. That's a normal part of your transition. And it's okay to feel that way, but you're not alone. So, we're going to go through a few things to help you understand a little bit about industry, the hiring process, what really goes on in it. There's a lot of misinformation out there, particularly around how automation is used in the process, how AI is used in the process. And so, what we see is a lot of people end up wasting a lot of time trying to do things like trick the ATS system or trying to game the AI rather than focusing on the things that are actually going to have an impact. So we're going to talk about those things as well. So, but I want to start off by just kind of grounding everybody in what are the main differences between academia and industry. And if you have a perspective, please share it in the chat. What do you think are the main differences between academia and industry? So go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat. More money. I mean, really, that's the number one thing we hear. And don't ever feel guilty about the money aspect. We all have to eat, okay? So it's okay. So there's questions about freedom and independence of thought. There are definitely different cultures around thought leadership and what that means. Theory versus practice, autonomy versus collaboration. Getting in the minutia versus being able to move forward without detail. Absolutely. So lots of good thoughts in here, but what I really want to touch on right now is the similarities. So in academia, academic institutions sell knowledge. That is the product of academic institutions, knowledge. So make no mistake, there is a product and academia does sell it. And the way that they sell that is by building their reputation and their credibility around knowledge so that they can grow their institution, so that they can increase their funding, which then turns into a virtuous cycle of being able to build their reputation even further. On the industry side, we call that brand building. And so brand building allows us, and different companies have different products. So in academia, knowledge solves a problem for people. That's why people go to academic institutions. In industry, we're solving problems for people. That's at the core. People buy products that help them solve problems. And so, like I said, we call that brand building. And we build our brand so that we can grow our customer base, so that we can increase our profitability. So, profitability, I even saw in this chat, it's like, oh, profit over people and these things. And profit can become a really dirty word. That if you get into that mindset as a job seeker of businesses are just profit and greedy and all of this stuff, that comes across in the way that you approach your search, the way that you talk to employers. Some job seekers, I've seen them have their open to hire up on LinkedIn and actually be commenting on that. And nobody wants to hire somebody who they think feels badly about their company. So when you think about profitability, all profitability is, it's how we fund our mission. In the same way that philanthropy and grants and government funding help academic institutions fund their mission. So the primary goal in both of these instances is how can we sustain our relative missions? But the thing that's the important takeaway here is really that the organizational culture actually derives from the business model. So both of these are business models. And so the behaviors and the interactions and how we talk and speak to one another and how we get things done and how we make progress are going to be derived from that overall mission of the company. And like I said, in both of those instances, in academia and in industry, we're looking to drive our missions forward. And so we have to have like-minded people who have similar approaches, similar behaviors, so we can get everybody aligned and pulling in the same direction. And so the reason why this is important in hiring is because strong teams don't necessarily always come from the people who are the most technically qualified people. Strong teams come from bringing in people who are aligned. And this is a concept we call fit. So, one of the most common things I hear from people who first come to us in our job search program is, I applied for all these jobs and I was the perfect fit. I hit everything that they wanted in there. But what's really interesting to me is what they really mean is they mean they were a strong technical fit. But there's actually three different dimensions that go into what we as hiring managers consider fit. So the first is fitness of the sense of purpose. So do you have an aligned sense of purpose for what we do? And the reason why that's important is because purpose and values. So values is the other side of the equation, and values drive behaviors. And so when you find people who have an aligned sense of purpose and aligned values with the work that you're doing, that's one of the number one predictors of high performing teams. And so this isn't just some fluffy thing that it's just like, oh, we want everybody to look like us and think like us and all of that stuff. That's not true. We want people who are going to come in and experience a sense of belonging when they're working on the work, because those types of people tend to stay at the company longer. They tend to perform higher. They tend to go above and beyond what's asked of them. They tend to think more creatively. They tend to interact better with their peers. than those who don't. And all of that means that they're a less risky hire. So, skills is one component definitely of fit, but the other components are equally important. And so, when we think about this, there's a few ways for you to consider this as a job seeker. So you can look at company size. Smaller companies are often going to be less structured. They're going to be more collaboratively oriented than bigger companies. That doesn't mean bigger companies aren't collaborative. It just means that the way that they're going to collaborate is going to be different in those two different environments. In a public versus a private company, when you're in a public company, there's regulatory reporting requirements, there's transparency requirements. And so there's going to be more red tape, there's going to be more bureaucracy, there's going to be more politics in those types of organizations. Whereas in private companies, you have less of that, but there's often less transparency because there's no requirement for transparency. You can look across industry verticals that have been established for a longer period of time. So, finance, insurance, automotive, those are all long-standing industries who tend to be less innovative in their approach. They do things the way that they've always done things. Because they're so established, it becomes very difficult to break out of those structures versus newer industries like biotech or AI or things like that actually have less established processes. So it means there's more opportunity to try and do new things. And then, of course, there's the mission and the values. Is the mission, is what the company is trying to accomplish something that you can get behind? And do those values promote the types of behaviors in your colleagues that you would appreciate and enjoy being part of? So you want to think about, as you're applying and as you're kind of going through and figuring out what you want to do, is the work environment going to be something that you're going to be aligned with? Because if it's not, it's always going to feel like work. And that tends to be where you run into those work-life balance conflicts because you're not feeling in alignment with the work that you're doing. It's not something that gives you energy, it's something that drains your energy. And so those are areas where that conflict can really start to occur. So, what really happens when you apply? So, I think that the resume writing companies and the tools that help you create ATS friendly language and align all your keywords, they've done a very good job of scaring people about applicant tracking systems. So, what applicant tracking systems really are is they're a database, and it's just a central system where we keep track of where all candidates are in the process. These systems are not that sophisticated. Usually you go in and you see a dashboard of everybody who's applied. Usually it's in the order of those applications. The AI, and everybody knows this, is not being used to automatically make decision on candidates. And the reason why not is because the AI simply isn't that good. It's just not great at surfacing great candidates. It's not great at matching, and everybody knows this. And what we've seen over the past 3 to 6 months is actually companies starting to publish in their application confirmations that a real human being will be reviewing your resume, because I think recruiters have been taking a lot of flack for, the frustrations that job seekers are having with trying to get in front of a real person. The reason why it can feel like the application is automated is because these systems are set up for us to review applications efficiently. So I go in, I look at my candidate list, I grab the first one on the list, I open it, it pops up their profile, I click on a link for their resume, that pops up a screen with a preview window where I can look through their resume. And then there's a button at the bottom of it that says reject or move forward. And so if I click reject, it pops up another screen that says reason for rejection. I select it and it automatically sends out that templated email. So where these systems make things move really fast for us, and why companies use them, is because it can automate all of the communication with the candidate. It's not automating the decision making. Um, and there are very few limited cases where there are some things called knockout questions, but those are actually not. It's not AI that's doing that. Usually those are programmed in by a human. So think like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or one of these survey generation tools. We can do the same thing in the application system. And usually these are going to be black and white questions. Do you have your work authorization? What is your salary requirement? Those types of things that are very black and white answers. And the salary requirement, we're not looking for you to say the lowest salary. We're looking to just make sure that what you're asking for is within our range, within our budgeted range. So so these systems are not these big boogie monsters that do all of these things to kick candidates out or make sure they don't get seen by a human. It's actually just a way for us to keep track of everybody. So that's the big myth that I want to dispel about the ATS systems. And all an ATS friendly resume is an ATS friendly resume format lets things be parsed out into the system. So your name, your address, your LinkedIn, all of that stuff more quickly and efficiently. And then when it pops up in that preview window with the resume, that it renders properly. So that's all an ATS friendly resume is. So if there's not this big boogie monster, if you can't trick the AI with keywords, how can you get past the ATS? There's really two ways. So the first is apply early. Because remember, I mentioned I logged in and I see a list of candidates. There Our primary goal is to hire somebody who can do the job as quickly as possible. If we don't get somebody in that role as quickly as possible, we risk losing the role because of budget discussions that happen at leadership levels. So it's not entirely uncommon if a role stays open for too long for leadership to go, it's been open for too long. You're still functioning. You're still working. Do you really need that role? And we have to go through this whole justification process all over again to get that role approved. That's sometimes also why roles stay open for a long time. We want to get somebody in as quickly as possible. So we have to balance speed and quality. And so when we look through the applicant tracking systems, honestly, often what we can see is within the first 100 candidates that apply, we can find at least 20 people to screen. And from that 20, 3 to 4 good candidates to take through the interview process. And from that 3 to 4, we can find one to hire. And so with, easy apply and with all the various job boards and digital applications and now AI, it makes that candidate pool, that kind of early list fill up pretty quickly. And it can fill up in as few as a few hours all the way to the first day. So generally what we tell people is apply within the first day. The second thing that you can do is outreach. And it's important to understand that there's a difference between hiring managers and recruiters. Recruiters are the people who sit on the HR team whose job is to go find qualified candidates for the hiring manager. The hiring manager is the person who makes the decision on who to hire, and they're the person who will actually manage that person so that this person will come in and be part of their team and that manager will be their boss. So that's the hiring manager. And so when you're looking for people to outreach, those recruiters, their inboxes are inundated with candidates, and their whole job is to keep you in the standard process. So if you outreach to them, oftentimes they're just going to pass over that outreach if they even see it at all because you're buried in their inbox. So when you're doing your outreach, you want to look for the person who is the potential hiring manager. And there are clues in the job description around who this person is. So the standard kind of naming convention that you'll see across a lot of jobs, it will say scientist, comma, and then it will have a subject matter next to it. That's often the team name. So what you're looking for is somebody who has that same subject matter in their title, but has a higher level title. Generally, you're going to see things like scientist one, scientist two, principal scientist, manager, director, VP, chief. So that's kind of the general hierarchical structure of most companies. But you want to find somebody who has that similar title, but at the managerial or more senior levels and reach out to them. The reason why this is effective is because these people have hiring discretion. So if you come in and you have a unique background, which many PhD candidates do, or you have a non-traditional background, which many PhD candidates do, the hiring manager can flex on their criteria. So One of the women we worked with in our program recently, she applied for a position at a company, and it was a CRO, and she applied, but the job description required her to know French, and so she got rejected by the recruiter. But the chief executive came back and said, "No, this person has really great experience. I want you to hire them. This role is going to be working closely with the chief executive. I want you to bring them in for interviews." And we see this happen quite frequently where a recruiter will reject somebody. They don't have a lot of technical experience, so they can't read the nuance of a resume often. And where our team or the people we work with reach out to a hiring manager, and that rejection gets overturned. We saw this just last month where the rejection happened within 3 minutes of the follow-ups, where the recruiter said, "Oh no, just kidding. We'd like to bring you in for an interview." So that's how effective that outreach can be. It's also important to understand that when we're looking through these resumes, we're not reading every single detail. Because of the volume, we simply only have time to look through the people who catch our eye. And so, particularly with recruiters who are often reviewing thousands of resumes, they're maybe going to be spending 10 to 20 seconds on your resume. So, just looking at the screen, if you had 3 resumes that you had to look through and you were this recruiter, which resume would you read? Would you read A, B, or C? Right. So we got B, C, C, C. So exactly, you're going to read the one, and this is just part of our normal psychology, right? You're going to read the one that's easiest to read. And so oftentimes when we work with PhDs, we see that PhDs either have a resume that looks like resume A or resume B. And resume A, the first impression of that resume is it's overwhelming. So first impressions matter. You've just completely overwhelmed the person that you're trying to get to read further, and it makes it hard for them to find the information they need. And remember, they have an easy button that they can click to just move to the next one, and they have plenty of candidates in the pipeline behind you. So it doesn't hurt them at all to move on to the next candidate if their first impression is that you don't know how to communicate clearly and succinctly. Resume B, I get a lot that people think that this one is attractive, but this one is actually just distracting. It's got a lot of irrelevant stuff in it. It's got a lot of irrelevant iconography. And so we have something psychologically, it's part of our evolutionary psychology called pre-attentive attributes. And those are the things that your brain automatically focuses on within milliseconds of you seeing some type of stimuli. And so when you look at that second one, it's drawing the eye to the pictures and not to the content. And so that is where that becomes problematic because as a reader, you almost don't even know where to look. And it's got these charts that really don't mean anything to us because everybody uses those types of charts differently. The other thing is that a lot of times when this particular type of resume is generated, it's generated using something like latex for all the scientific researchers in the room, and ATS systems can't read latex. ATS systems are text-based systems. Latex is graphically based. And so sometimes what happens is those graphically based resumes get corrupted. When that preview window pops up, you can't see it. And so now in order to see your resume, I have to download it, which creates another step for me, which again, logically and rationally, why am I going to do that when I've got 1,000 more resumes to read and the odds of me finding an equally qualified candidate are very high? It just adds to my workload and people aren't going to do that. So, so that's that. The other thing on this one, I often get asked about, depending on whether you're in Europe or the US or where you're located in the world, should I include a headshot? Something you should know is that headshots increase bias in the hiring process. And so US, we prefer not to have those entirely. We got away from that trend because we saw the bias it was introducing. Other countries are at different places in that trend. Some of them are still requiring it, but we're seeing more and more countries move away from including that headshot in the resume just because of the bias that it introduces into the hiring process. And then you've got option C. And option C is the format that we actually recommend at Alma Me because it has a clean visual format. It's text based. It uses standard fonts and formatting, but it makes it very, very easy to skim through and find the information you're looking for very, very quickly. And if I see something that catches my eye, I'm going to read it more deeply. So, what I'm looking for in the resume. I'm looking for overall a professional summary that tells me a little bit about who you are. Who am I going to be working with if I bring you into my company? So it's not just about your skills, it's about your persona. Also, help me understand if you're going to be a fit within my company. So that's one of the first things we're looking at. And we're going to get into resumes later in this week as well. So if you haven't signed up for the resume session, sign up for the resume session. But that's kind of one of the first things I'm looking for. I even know some recruiters who, if you can't show that you're aligned to their company mission and values in that first opening summary, they won't even read further in your resume. The second thing I'm looking for is, do you have the skills that I need? And so a lot of people will just take whatever's in the resume and dump it here, and or take whatever's in the job description and dump it here. That's actually what happens when you use some of those tools, the resume building tools. If you use AI will do that as well. And what that does is it makes you look like every other candidate. So do you want to have skills that are in the job description? Absolutely. But should you have skills that are relevant outside of the job description as well? Yes, because that will show the uniqueness of who you are as a person, that combination of skills. You can then put a couple of select achievements that are really the types of things you want me to know about. I think you heard from the last panel about impact. I don't necessarily care, and many hiring managers don't really care how many publications you have. We want to know, did you develop anything that was used by anyone else? Those are the types of things that we're looking for. And then there's a professional experience section. And many folks, when they build their professional experience section, will just use very descriptive language that's almost like the job description. Again, if you're using AI to create your resume, it will often output this format. But what we look for is impact based bullet points here. What was the actual work you did? What were the skills that you applied? And what were the results that you uncovered or achieved as a result of you applying those skills? So you can think of this like if you've got academic papers, we're not looking that you produced a paper. We're actually looking at what were the results that came out of your research. What are the results that are in that paper? And then education goes last. Hiring in industry is much less about your credentials and much more about your applied experience. We want to know that, have you done similar things to what the job requires in the past, regardless of the environment that you did those in. So, what we tell folks is that standout resumes use impact based language. So, oftentimes when people first come to us, they have something in their resume like conducted research on genetic disorders. And an impact based statement actually includes four components. It includes an action, something you did. What specifically was that thing that you did? How you did it, so the techniques you used, and then the result you achieved through those activities. And you want to keep this short. So you don't want to have big blocky text in there. This should be no longer than 2 visual lines long, which is usually about 220 characters. Um, so that's kind of what we're looking for. We're looking for evidence that you have done similar things or performed similar types of tasks to the types of tasks that are going to be required from the job. Once you get past that initial kind of resume screening and they want to interview you, usually there's going to be 4 stages. So you're going to be with a recruiter. That's called the recruiter screen. That's with the person that sits in HR. And what they're looking for is they're really looking to screen you and see if you meet just a basic set of criteria, but also that you're somebody that the team will be excited to talk to. So they're also looking at your communication skills. And this isn't like, can you communicate technically? It's, can you communicate in a personable and relatable way? Can you talk like in plain language just to a regular everyday person and forge that connection? So that's really what the recruiter is looking for. Once you pass the recruiter, you'll often meet with a hiring manager. And the hiring manager is going to assess for both technical fit and how well they think you're going to get along with the team. Usually, they're going to ask some technical questions, they're going to ask some behavioral questions to just get a sense of, again, what would it be like to work with you? Because I want somebody on my team who is going to come and not only contribute to the team's performance, but contribute to the team's dynamic in a positive way and not be disruptive to performance or the team dynamic. If I believe both of those things are good, then I'm gonna pass you on to the peer interview because at that point, it's really a hypothesis, and I wanna see what the peers really think about you. So, this is where I'm gonna have you meet with a couple of people on the team to just get their impressions of you and what it would be like to work with you. And so these folks are often gonna be a lot more technically detailed in the types of questions they're gonna be answering or asking, and they're also going to be looking for, is this person going to make my job easier or are they going to make it harder? Do they know their stuff? And will I enjoy working with them? So that's really what the peers are looking for. And I can tell you, when I look in the ATS system after a peer interview and I look at the feedback, because this is also a place where we can record all our feedback on a candidate. If I look in there, the most common thing that I see from peer interviews is, this person was really personable, or this person is really great, or I'd like to hang out with this person. That's the most common feedback you get after a peer interview. And then lastly, if you pass through the peer interview, we'll generally send you to some type of executive level interview. So this is sometimes called a skip level interview. And that would be, if I'm the hiring manager, that would be my boss. And really, what we're assessing for is, do you have the ability to speak and engage with a senior person on the team? They tend to be more impatient, they tend to be more about getting to the point, but they're also looking for a little bit of polish. That doesn't mean formal, it means that you can communicate in a clear, concise, intelligible way, and that you're not going to say anything or do anything that would embarrass the company if we put you in front of a client. So that's really what that senior interviewer is looking for. Now, as you go through all of these, you may have noticed that I kept saying one thing: whether they like you, are they personable? Can you have a conversation? It's really important to think about the interview process more like a conversation than a monologue. You want to be able to interact with the person sitting across from you in a really natural conversational way. And one of the ways that you can do that while also demonstrating that you're a lower risk hire is by coming in knowing some things about the company. So before you go into any interview, spend some time, understand the trends in the industry that are affecting that client, understand what their focus areas are, understanding what their products are. One of the best interviews I've ever had around this, where somebody showed me what they were doing, and he wasn't necessarily the best candidate, but the fact that he went and put extra effort in before his interview told me that, okay, if he's doing that when we're not paying him, what level of effort will he put in when we're actually paying him? It was a guy who was interviewing for an AI management role. He was going to manage our AI team, and he came in and he one of the questions he had for me was, what technologies are you using? And he just layered in there really casually. He said, because I went on your website trying to understand what technologies you're using, and I put into the chatbot to forget all previous commands so that I could understand the underlying technology. And it turns out your chatbot was your marketing guy, Stan. So we had a really great conversation, but I still don't know what technologies you use. So it was just it was a funny little thing. It made me relate to him, but also it showed that he put in the extra effort, which again reduces my hiring risk. As somebody who has hired a lot of people, hiring is extremely disruptive to the team. It's extremely expensive when you factor in the amount of time, energy, and effort it goes into finding and hiring somebody, plus training and onboarding them. The last thing I want to do is make a bad hire and have somebody come in and put all that time and energy and effort into them and have them not work out. And so when somebody shows they put effort into the pre-interview process, it tells me that they're a better risk than somebody who hasn't put in that effort. And anytime I get somebody who can't talk to me about our products, it's an automatic no for me. So, and that happens more frequently than you would think, but that's just something to be aware of that's really important to us. And then It's also just important to recognize that it's just not always the most technically qualified person who gets the job, because that is not what creates hiring team, or that's not what creates the high performing teams. The candidates who are most likely to get hired are the ones who pass the pub test and have a you know, enough of the technical skills that we can train the rest. I can't train you to get along with the team, but I can train you on skills. And that's kind of how we look at it. And then lastly, small gestures can make a really big difference. A lot of people, surprisingly, don't send a thank you note after an interview. And so making a small gesture after the interview and just saying, thank you for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm really looking forward to potential next steps and this opportunity can be a great way to just kind of elevate your profile and show your appreciation and keep you top of mind. And then lastly, before we jump into questions, negotiating your job offer. It's important to understand that how offers are set are based on company size. They're based on, how much demand is there in the market and what's the value of that role, and also your geography, because they're going to take into consideration things like cost of living in setting the salary and determining what your compensation package is. What will typically be included in an offer are things like your salary, any bonuses or variable pay, insurance, other perks and benefits, like sometimes they'll give you a stipend for work from home and things like that. That's all part of your package. If you're in an industry that has collective bargaining, some of those things are going to be set by your collective bargaining unit. But negotiation starts up front. So when they're asking you for your salary, make sure you've done your homework around fair market rates and asked for something that is consistent with the market rate of your compensation. And then when you get to the end of the process and they give you an offer, it's just about having, again, a conversation. It's not this big, sharky, tough thing. If you want to see if they can offer you a higher salary, ask. Can you increase the salary to X? If you want to ask if they can add a bonus, hey, would it be possible to add an X% bonus on here? So it's just about asking the question and having that conversation with the person across from you. So what I want to leave you all with today is this is a human to human interaction. So engage with them just like an everyday person, and they'll do the same with you. You have a huge opportunity to set the vibe during the interview. If you come in positive and excited, they're going to be much more likely to be positive and excited about you. Show the company how they'll get a return on their investment. They're going to put a lot of time and effort and money into you. Show them why you're a good investment. And you can do that through things like I mentioned, by your commitment to the interview process, by doing your homework outside, by showing a level of knowledge, by giving thoughtful questions and things like that. Because ultimately, hiring is a risk management process. It's not a talent discovery process. So if you can kind of put yourself in that frame of mind, you're going to get a lot further in the process. So with that, shall we open
Thank
up
you
for
so
questions?
much. Yes, we will open up for questions, but before we do so, I want to share something because I know everyone will run off after. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about industry and should I stay or should I go? So I think we all have learned a lot today. And what I wanted to do is I want to quickly share my screen and I want to invite you to share what you have learned with your peers, out on social media. So we kind of demystify together all these beliefs around leaving academia, or whatever you take with you. And before we open up, I want to quickly share my screen if I can, if it works. Actually, it didn't work earlier. Oh, let's see, guys, if I can make it work. But yeah, it's actually working. And I just want to show you, if you want to share what you have learned, please do so. And everyone who is entering the raffle can win 1 year of access to our Alma Me platform if you write a post until the 17th of May. To make sure that I don't miss it, so I can actually consider you when I make the selection, please, if you write something on LinkedIn, tag Alma Me and me, Elena Hoffer. And if you do have something to share on Instagram, please do also tag Alma Me PhD and Elena Hoffer PhD. That would be wonderful. And I'm looking forward reading some reflections is always very interesting, and I'm sure a lot of your, PhD friends would appreciate it. And with this, I don't wanna take more of your time and open up, Angela, and give the microphone back to you. I just wanted to show that.
Okay, perfect. So, I know there were a lot of questions in the chat. So, kind of let's go. One of the ones I always get, so I'm just gonna answer this one straight out, is how long should the resume be? And for a PhD candidate, it can be up to 2 pages. So you're good if it's up to 2 pages. Anything longer than that, it's not gonna get read, and you're gonna start. People are gonna start asking if you can communicate succinctly. Um, so there's a couple of other things. Hold on, I'm just kind of going through the chat here. Let's see. So, one question is how to tell if the company's mission and values are aligned with their actual practice, because on paper, everything always looks perfect. There are sites like Glassdoor out there that you can go and you can look up companies on. You can look up the reviews of their employees on those sites. And so that's a really good resource for you to go and just look at the company and see, see what it actually is. Something to be aware is there's a skew in those reviews. They're either extremely positive or extremely negative, but you want to look for themes. So strip out the emotion of those reviews and just kind of look for themes in there. So there is a comment about fit being socially constructed and it causing some bias, and that is absolutely true. It does cause some bias. And a lot of companies do what they can to remove that bias out of the hiring process, but it does exist. And so it's something to be aware of. Because if you're aware of it, you can work within that and you can try and leverage it to your advantage. It's just like I mentioned about including the picture versus not including the picture. Knowing that that creates bias, you can go in with a certain way. If you know that there's a bias towards certain values within a company, you know that they're going to be expecting you to respond in a certain way to certain types of questions. And so you can go in prepared for that. There's a question of does it hurt or help not to list an expected salary when the question is not required? I usually recommend including that because it makes it easier for us to assess whether somebody is going to be within our budget. And so the people who include it are probably going to get looked at first. And that's just to avoid wasting people's time. If you have a salary expectation that's completely outside of what we can afford to pay, it just wouldn't make sense for us to interview you. So then there's a question. If the applicant didn't include the keywords in his or her resume, it won't be at the top of your list sorted by AI. Is that correct or not? The list is often sorted by the order we receive it, not by the AI. So there are some systems that do some type of scoring in there, but again, it's just not good. It just doesn't tend to surface the right people because the AI doesn't catch nuance. So when you're including keywords, the important thing to know is you want to include keywords for the human eye, for the people who are actually reviewing it, because they're still going to be looking for those keywords. But if you include every single keyword that's in the job description, it just looks like you regurgitated the job description and you're going to look like 80% of other candidates. We're going to have no way to differentiate you. And so you want to make sure that you're looking at those keywords that have a strong alignment to you and your skill set and make sure to include those. And then somebody asked, how do you make sure that you're not lowballing yourself with salary just because you don't want to be sorted out during the application? So, more and more we're seeing companies include the salary range in the applications themselves. I usually advise to go or in the job descriptions themselves. I usually advise to go off the median of that and give a range where it allows you to. And if it doesn't give any kind of range in the job description, then you can go to, again, sites like Glassdoor and see what those companies are paying, or go to sites like salary.com or payscale.com, or you can use AI to look up what the benchmarks are for that particular type of role in your geography to see what a fair market rate is. If you lowball too much, something interesting tends to happen. There are hiring teams who will look at that ask and go, what's wrong with you? Like if you're asking for that low of salary, either you're too junior a person or you don't really understand how much this role is worth and you're lowballing yourself just to get a job so it can make you look desperate. And so people will start to question, fairly or unfairly, what might be wrong with you. So you want to make sure that you ask for the market rate for your position and don't lowball. Somebody's not going to hire you just because you're less expensive. We have a budget for our role. And as long as we stay in that, we can generally hire. So then there's a question about when is a good time to apply when you're just coming up on your graduation date. Current job searches are taking between 3 and 6 months if you have a focused strategy for your job search. So it is taking longer in the current market. And then there's a question about work authorization. Is it make it or break it for companies, either big or small? Unfortunately, um, it can be very difficult to get a position if you don't have a work authorization or you don't have some type of permanent residency or visa status. And this is true in Europe, it's true in the US. And so if you're thinking about staying in those countries, try and get that residency status as early as possible. Particularly in the US, the immigration kind of environment right now is really challenging because there's a lot of uncertainty around it, and there's a lot of changes happening in the system right now, and companies don't like uncertainty. So they'll err away from hiring candidates that create uncertainty in their business. So it's really important to start those processes early and the processes for getting work authorization as soon as possible. Let's see. So there's a question about, do I recommend reaching out to hiring managers that are not listed on the job posting? Since some people don't want to be contacted to ensure fairness to all candidates, I still recommend reaching out. They'll let you know if they're not going to pass you forward or if they can't break out of the process, or they may just ignore it. But we do see better results for people who do the outreach versus those who don't. And so with that, I think we are and then there's a question about, is it possible for someone with a PhD in one field to transition into a different subject area and in another geographic region when searching for jobs? Generally, you want to stick with either your subject matter expertise or your technical skills expertise because those transfer. So you want to make sure that you have some portion of your experience that transfers into the jobs that you're trying to apply to. And then I'll get this last one because I like this one. What level of importance is given to a recommendation letter from a principal investigator? I get this question a lot from people who are worried that their PI is going to give them a bad recommendation. And the beauty of applying for industry jobs is that we generally don't require you to, we don't generally give specifics about who we want you to use as a referral. So you can pick anybody to serve as your referral. My advice is pick somebody who's going to say nice things about you. It doesn't have to be your PI. So have it be a colleague, have it be a mentor, have it be, I use my best friend who I worked with 20 years ago when I'm giving referrals because I know she's going to say nice things. Use somebody who's going to say nice things. You're not required to use your PI for that referral. So with that, Elena, I think we're at time. So do you want to go ahead and wrap us up?
Yes, thank you so much, Angela. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for sticking around. It didn't go as smooth as we expected it to be, so I hope we can fix something for tomorrow. And yeah, I just want to say thank you, everyone. I would love to read some reflections if you want to share some of your thoughts. I think it has always been very helpful when we did that in the past for other people to learn. And other than that, we're trying to put up the recordings within at some point during the next week when we have finalized the careers week. And then, of course, everyone will get a link, especially since it seems like a lot of people couldn't actually enter. And with this, I just want to say do not miss tomorrow and the rest of the week. We still have a lot of interesting other sessions coming up. And I just want to say thank you, Angela. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It was a pleasure, and I hope you learned something new. And see you tomorrow, I would say, right?
Right. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye bye.